Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share cannibal horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Don Creekrancher 1883. I think my husband is a cannibal. I can't begin to tell you how many times I sat here, typing everything out only to press backspace until I was staring at a blank screen once again. I wasn't even sure if I should place this onto here. The internet has a funny way of connecting people like that after all, letting them find things, yet I wasn't sure where else to go. How many paper trails I can make of this before they're all gone? Where do I begin? How do I begin? Well, I suppose we should start with the title, the topic, the reason for why you are here. I think my husband is a cannibal. Perhaps serial killer would be the better term, more accurate. Perhaps I shouldn't even use the word think when it's more of a know. And you're probably scrolling through this wondering why I haven't left yet. How I didn't know. Welcome to the club on that one. I always thought that I was good at reading people after being bitten one too many times. I had even spent the last 15 years of my life with him. I could tell you what every micro-expression on his face meant as if I was an archaeologist examining his bones. I could read his eyes, his posture, the very gait in his walk. I knew the little things and the big things. The reasons for it all. If the world was ending, I could find him in the aftermath by just his very atoms. I could find him at the beginning too. Just as he could read me. Knew me. We might as well have spent the beginning of our stardusted time together. Yet I could not begin to tell you how I didn't know this. How I didn't see what Sam was. We were high school acquaintances turned friends when we left for different colleges, reconnected through the same goal. That goal being the Necromantian Ranch, located in northwestern Wyoming. Over 15,000 acres, filled with mountains and valleys and open plains, with history old and new carved out into the land. The original owners had used it for cattle and horses, and had kept their family there since 1885. I wasn't sure why they were selling, but both Sam and I were tired of living in Boston. We wanted the country life, a revert back, a fresh start, and through our shared finances we were able to do it. Sam had inherited a rather large amount from his family over the years from what he had told me. And I, well, made money with my degree. Aggressively saving every penny until I was sure that I would die having saved everything and spent nothing. The ranch had merely been an opportunity for the both of us to have our own place. Far, far away from Western civilization. A place where it wouldn't matter what degrees we held or what positions we carried. I had grown up on a farm after all, if memory serves correct, as had Sam. Boston had been an imperfection within our current state. And the ranch was perfect. The ranch hands who stayed on with us called it Dawn Creek Ranch due to the sun rising over the creek bed that separated the open front yard of the home to the woods and mountains. The home that sat on it was even surprisingly modern and didn't take too many renovations, though I left that for Sam to deal with. The closest neighbors nearby didn't even seem to mind that we were new owners coming in. Everything fell into an odd place as if fate was pulling the strings. The beginning harvest yielded nearly without consequence. The livestock flourished with little death. We spent an entire year here in peace before the first incident. I call it an incident, solely for the factor that the investigation was closed rather swiftly. The detective had come onto the property and didn't return again after the first round of questioning. I say the first because it was never really followed up on. The weeks I had spent waiting to see his car pull up again had never come, and it was all due to the issue at hand. The incident. It had been the first time that a ranch hand had gone missing. Tucker Abbott had been one of the ones that we had hired on. A drifter, my husband had called him, though seasonal employee would have been the better phrasing. He was a young 20-something who told us that he spent his summers down in Arizona and Nevada. Instagram proved that he wasn't trying to con us, and his work certainly showed the skill. Though he was known for staying out late at times, drifting off for a walk in the woods or going into town for the nearest bar. When he didn't show up that morning at the barn gates, we assumed he had gone into town and stayed out too late. When one of the hands mentioned him going off into the woods on one of our paths, we assumed he merely got turned around. We searched for him for hours until the sun finally set. Then when his belongings disappeared the next morning, everyone assumed that he had decided to leave. Off on his way to another ranch. The season was ending after all. Though, as the one handling the finances for the ranch hands, I didn't understand at the time why a nomad would forget their last envelope of cash. Though I was quickly reassured that it meant nothing. Even when a detective showed up. Perhaps I should have pushed it then, when later that same day my husband had offered me dinners of meat that I had not prepared. Finances aside, Sam couldn't kill an animal for food if he tried. I had been the butcher on the ranch. Any meat not done by hand came from the supermarket in the nearest town. Only I could tell by looking at the raw meat sitting on the counter that it wasn't made in some factory and bought. No one had left the ranch either. Did a hand do that for you? I can recall asking, and Sam had merely grinned at me, shaking his head as if I had told him that the sun was out when it was raining. I did this one, he stated, turning back around to prepare the dinner. I didn't eat that night. Or any night he cooked after that until the meat was gone. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe I subconsciously knew something was wrong. Because butchering aside, Sam was the better cook and I never turned down a meal from him. There was just this pit that formed in me the moment I saw it. A hollow weight pushing down within my throat, against my heart. Nothing changed outside of that though. Not even when that same detective came to investigate once again. Not even when the other hands started to disappear one by one. This is probably where you're going, seriously, and there is no way all of this could be happening and she never once questioned him. Well, you're partially right. I did question him, or more specifically, him over the hands. Only he brought it all down to them leaving due to seasonal work or because the others were leaving and they didn't want to work. And I couldn't necessarily argue back. The livestock thrived. The harvest yielded. Winter came brutal with a mother's hate and spring came with a warm hand against the land. It got to the point where I was wondering why we even needed the hands at all to begin with. I had gotten used to the extra work. Felt myself come to life with spring around me once again. I never even thought of Tucker Abbott until this past week when I walked in for dinner and found that same kind of meat sitting on the counter. I didn't butcher that, I remarked, pausing in my path to the kitchen. Sam merely stared at me, holding up a box of taco shell packets that we had gotten from the store a while back. I hope you're hungry this time. I know how you like your tacos. "I know that you've been avoiding the meat," goes unsaid. I could see it in his eyes though. I watched it in the trace of his veins as he held the skillet and began to break the grounded meat apart. I didn't want to say anything though. A part of me even considered the fact that I was possibly going crazy. Surely Sam knew how to butcher the animals. I hadn't done any in a while, and I certainly wasn't keeping track of any missing heads. He easily could have done this in my sleep, and I was letting my head get the best of me. Even if Sam had never so much as killed a bug in all of the years that I had known him. Sure thing, I had taken my seat then. These past few months have just been off for me. Sam hummed at that, continuing to cook, and we shared silence until he was done. The night then fell into routine. He made our plates, sat mine before me, before taking his seat. We didn't say grace or anything, merely waiting for the other to dig in what could only be described as one waiting for the other to bite into a kill. I had finally gone first and kicked myself for overthinking the first time. The meat was delicious, not cow or chicken, or the usual deer. I couldn't pinpoint what it was though as I let it sit in my mouth before swallowing. It's not turkey, is it? Does it taste like turkey? Sam mused back, stabbing his fork into the small side salad that he had made for us. Well, no, I just can't narrow it down. We can make it into a game. It wasn't a question either, causing me to frown. Our games were normally board games or chess, or ones filled with the forest floor and grounds of the open plains beneath my feet. Mind games were not ones that we usually played on one another. If you could even call this a mind game, but at the time I had considered it. A guessing game? I asked, taking another bite. It was so easy to watch the juices from the meat run down my fingers, staining my hands. What other game would it be, Amelia? Come on. Like I Spy that we used to play on road trips, or Where's Waldo? Waldo? I had almost smarted back then that he didn't even know what the game even meant until I began to look around. Kitchen decor had been his thing. I never once paid attention to our shelves, but I recognized the items. A cowboy hat here. A lasso there. A silver pants chain. The worn leather of a wallet devoid of contents. A compass. A pocket knife. Things that looked abandoned as if placed there when coming in. The only thing that stood out from it was a silver watch that was far too businesslike for either of us, and far too expensive for anyone that had worked for us. Is that your watch? Close, but not quite. It's certainly not mine. Besides, when did we start leaving things like those in the kitchen? Sam merely took another bite, chewing slowly as he watched me, before he stopped. His jaw tightened. Have I ever told you how intelligent you are? Not recently, no. You've seen the watch before. Think on it, was all that he said. The rest of dinner was quiet. Uneventful outside of the talk of the weather and nearby cow prices. I hadn't even thought of our game that ended before it could begin until I found myself going down into the kitchen at 2 a.m. I couldn't tell you why I did it. I couldn't tell you what brought me down there. But I couldn't get the taste out of my mouth. No matter how many times I gazed into my own eyes, brushing my mouth out until blood fell. The leftover meat sat in a dish in the fridge, covered in clear plastic wrap to keep it fresh. I had grabbed it without even standing there to think what it was that I wanted. Then I had gone outside. Sat in the grass until the cold earth sunk into my skin. Watching the juices of the meat stain my fingers and drip down my arms. Taco shells long forgotten in the cabinet. One bite after the next. I was sure that Sam was going to find me shoveling the meat haplessly into my mouth. Gorging myself. Only he hadn't come. Never even noticed I was gone. The next day he didn't even question the missing meat. He merely prepared more. As if he had been saving up for the very occasion that I had finally decided to eat his new meals with new meat. And it wasn't until 2 days ago when I realized that I did remember where the watch had come from. The detective had worn a watch just like it. The only model that I had ever seen. It didn't take long for my mind to connect after that. One night after another, as I ate the remains and sunk within the earth. I think my husband is a cannibal, a serial killer, maybe even something else entirely. Something far older than one whose name is Sam. But that means that I am too, and well, I've always been the butcher. So I ask you, Reddit, now that I've laid it all out, what should I do about this? Second story. This story was shared by you/ifiogointothwoods. The cannibal family who lived in the woods. There was a family who lived in the woods near my house. At first it was a poor young couple with nowhere else to go, but they soon had children, and those children bred until there was 20 in the brood. They lived in a cave cut into a rock face, and fed on roots and woodland creatures. Every so often they'd lay in wait just off the path and ambush passers-by. They robbed the men, raped the women and, in winter, ate the corpses. You can imagine what my new girlfriend thought when I suggested we take a walk through the woods at night. It was hundreds of years ago, I said. I don't know. Trust me. Truth be told, I'd warn anyone away from walking through those woods, but I had no choice. We just started going out, and she had a reputation for going out with bad boys. If I wanted to live up to her exes, I'd have to be daring. I dragged her into the woods. It was getting late, and the only sounds came from our own footsteps. Moonlight sneaked through the twisted trees and our feet squelched in the mud. Tell me about your family, I said. She wouldn't talk much about them, and I could tell it was a subject she didn't like. I asked questions, trying to seem interested, but soon conversation dried up. In fact, I already knew she had problems with her family. Her brother died while serving in the army and her father had left when she was a girl. She had trust issues, and maybe you could say I was exploiting them. We were alone in the woods, and she only had me to help her. She had let go of my hand a while back, but she grabbed it again when something crashed through the trees. It's just a rabbit, I said. I carried it off well, but I was nervous. I didn't actually see what ran past us, but a rabbit seemed a reasonable explanation. It was a good enough reason to draw her closer to me. That family didn't really live here, did they? It's just a legend, she said. No, they really existed. There were 20 of them and they were inbred. Did they really kill people? Oh yes. And eat them? So they say. She gripped my hand tighter. What happened to them? Caught by the police after they murdered an entire family. They were hung in the town center. I want to go, she said. We were in the middle of the wood, where no light got through and wind moaned through the trees. We were far away from her house, so deep in the woods she'd never find her way out. I didn't tell her, but we were close to the cave where the family lived. She wasn't talking to me now, and she walked faster, forcing me along with her. I tried to draw her back, but she ignored me. Ahead of us I could see the cave. Creeping Charlie grew across its mouth and went some way to disguising it. I hoped she wouldn't see. "Where did you go to school?" I said. "I don't want to talk. Just get me out of here." She tugged on my hand hard enough to hurt. We walked faster. There was rustling in the bushes ahead, and we moved further to the right, to walk in an arc away from whatever was there. As we got closer the rustling grew louder, and I could make out a shadow. A man stepped out, and looked straight at my girlfriend. He had mud covering his face, except where wrinkles cracked through. His beard was overgrown. He walked toward us, and another man stepped out of the bush behind him. And another. Soon 5 of them were in front of us, joined by an old hag at the back. Evil was on their faces. They stood in the middle of the path, waiting. My girlfriend lost control of herself, whimpering into my sleeve. We stopped, and I turned to her. "I'd like you to meet my family," I said. Third story. This story was shared by you/Melting Alphabet. Have you ever met a cannibal? Have you ever met a cannibal? I assume not. Or at least, not that you know. What do you picture when you think of a cannibal? Someone from a country far from yours, with sharpened teeth, straw skirt, and black mud painted on their face, skin browned by sun and dirt. Or do you picture a moving corpse, shuffling over the pavement towards you, one arm dangling uselessly while the other points at you, not accusingly, but with a lazy determination that pulls them forward closer to your still-living brain? Do you imagine a man in a gray and yellowing wife beater, large sweat stains permanently etched under his arms, his forehead slick with perspiration from the humid southern heat, sawed-off shotgun in one hand and his wife/sister smiling gleefully behind him, revealing 2 incomplete rows of teeth, as you struggle against the restraints of your bounds? Does a white wintry mountain top fill your mind instead? Blistering wind swiping at her face as the stranded hiker grits her teeth, stabbing desperately at the frozen elbow of her guide, ignoring the frostbite sinking deeper into her lips and nose, tugging at the forearm in an attempt to free it from the corpse for her weary trek downward. Mrs. Jones was an old woman, plumb with age and prosperity. Her face traced by the lines of age, wisdom, and what some would consider to be valuable experience. Her long fine gray hair, cleaned and brushed every morning, hung behind her back in a neat simple braid. She did not live in a shoe, nor did she live in a house made of gingerbread and candy. She lived with her husband, Henry Jones, and her grandson, Billy Jones. Billy's mother died of a staph infection when he was very young, so the older Jones, having money and room to spare, adopted him and raised him as their own. Mrs. Jones, or Beatty, as she preferred to be called, was very happy living with her little family in their modest but comfortable 2-bedroom home on their sunny friendly suburban street. All of Beatty's neighbors, as well as the teachers at Billy's school, and the girls who played bridge at the community center every week, loved her. She was kind and gentle, and everyone agreed that she made the best snickerdoodles in town. But Beatty was also the one responsible for the string of missing people that occurred over the span of 30 years, only a few miles away from her home. See, every 6 months or so, Beatty would drive 20 minutes to the bus hub. Chrome buses that took passengers from one city to another would stop briefly in the town next to Beatty's sunny suburbia, before continuing on. When the night was still and calm, and the neighborhood slept around her, Beatty would climb out of her warm bed, careful not to disturb Henry, snoring peacefully beside her. Her slippered feet would pad across the carpet, quiet and light as a cat's paws. She'd shuffle to the front door, put on her gardening shoes, and get in her low gray Buick, the door closing with a small audible thud behind her. Once at the station, she'd laboriously pull herself out of the driver's seat. She'd have parked at the back of the parking lot, just out of reach of the few yellow lights standing close to the buses, as if huddled around comfort and warmth. She'd grab her cane from the back seat, and depart to the hub. The rubber tip of the cane coming down onto the ground with a dull smack, followed by one slow footstep, and then another, making the trek to the lone bus or two, waiting to reboard. There, she'd stop and scan the desolate crowd of tired travelers, the wind lazily blowing around her, pulling and pushing at the long heavy braid. None of them paid attention to her. They never did. It was late and dark, and they were weary. All they wanted to do was get on their bus, fall asleep, and wake up home, or on vacation, or with a long-distance lover, or an old friend. Beatty would find the most pathetic, loneliest of the bunch. The man, woman, girl, boy, or none of the above who was distancing themselves from the rest of the waiting group. Maybe the skin of their cheeks was stained with tears. Or maybe they were rubbing their arms, not for warmth, but for comfort. They were the ones who didn't have a cell phone in their hands. The ones who didn't seem impatient to leave the isolation and emptiness of the bus station. Once found, Mrs. Jones would walk slowly to this person, her cane hitting the pavement in front of her with each step. Maybe the person would look up at her. Maybe they'd be so involved in their own issues that they wouldn't notice. Maybe they just wouldn't care. She'd clear her throat and say, "Excuse me, sir," or "Pardon me, madam," or "Hello." They'd lift their head slowly, locking eyes with this sweet, kindly old woman, and smile slightly. Beatty would open her mouth into a wide, gummy smile. "I hate to be a bother," her weak voice would creak and groan over the words, "but would you mind helping me with my bag?" She'd lift her cane slowly and point to the buck, waiting in the inky darkness. The trunk would rise slowly into the air, revealing a small black bag sitting inside. The stranger would turn to her and smile, often saying, "Is this all?" Mrs. Jones would chuckle, the sound escaping her throat dryly, and the person would feel lighter, freer. Maybe more than they had in a really long time. They'd grab the handle of the bag and pull, but the bag would not come easily. It was heavy. Very heavy. They'd be surprised. Sometimes they'd make a joke, "Are you bringing the mixer?" and Beatty would repeat the same dry chuckle. They'd reach into the trunk, grabbing onto the bottom of the suitcase with one hand while keeping the handle in the other, and prepare themselves. A quick deep thing at the base of their neck would leave them limp. Billy, holding an old worn bat, would look into his grandmother's eyes. She'd nod her head, slowly, and he'd return the nod. His dark gaze would survey the area, double-checking the parking lot to make sure no one saw. No one ever would. Beatty had noticed Billy's particular appetite after he had turned 8. It started with Billy refusing his vegetables, which Beatty laughed off as normal childhood behavior. Then he started refusing potatoes and bread, and even cakes and candy. She was a smart woman, and she soon realized that Billy would only eat meat. Over time, his preference became specific to meat that was practically still raw. The tiny boy refusing anything that wasn't red and juicy when she cut into it, the flesh cold to the touch. Just like his mother. She knew the tastes would change, morph. She knew what she had to do. Beatty was a good grandmother. She took care of Billy, and due to her efforts, Billy grew up to be big and strong and successful. We all have to make our way in this world. We all have to learn to satisfy our own cravings. The felt tip of the black marker glides over her skin. Stacy, or Tracy, or maybe Laura, sits back onto the plastic medical chair, the blue and white gown draped over her slight body, to protect a modesty wholly unnecessary in front of me. I mark her cheekbones, her ears, her neck, her arms. The marker metaphorically cutting into her, showing me where I'm going to dissect her skin, lacerate her tissue, tear her muscles, break her bones. It is the outline of where I will rip her apart, where I will saw and pick and slice. I push aside her gown and mark her waist and thighs, the soft fleshy feminine parts of her body that I will cook, chew, swallow. When I am done, her face and body are a mask of black war paint, signally death and rebirth, a battle upon her body that together, we will overcome. She to return, not as the wounded warrior, but as the hardened princess. I have reclaimed her body as the cubist mirage all matter can be broken into. I, the Picasso who will rearrange her until her form is mutilated beyond beauty and perfection. Until she is no longer whole, but pieces of a human transcendent of biological need and years of evolutionary progress. She is a canvas of all our post-humanistic desires. Why be mere mortal when one can become art? Pulling the medical gloves taut, I let go of the wrist with a sharp snap, picturing the blood oozing through my fingers, the feel of the firm sticky flesh, dulled by the slick rubber. I salivate as I walk into the operating theater. I think of bowing to an imaginary audience before I begin, but I refrain. I am the silent director of my own macabre masterpiece. Afterwards, I return the pieces of flesh, fat, and meat that I've taken from my victim, wrapped delicately in plastic, to my personal lunch cooler in the staff fridge. My mind lazily toys with thoughts of the nurses who walk out of the room, focused on the next task at hand as they leave me to deal with the biological trash. I've spent years insisting on cleaning up after myself. I think they believe I'm being sweet, the only surgeon who has remained humble here in this house of butchery. No one ever notices the suspiciously light bio-waste bags left over from my operations. Or if they do, no one ever cares. I feel bad that my grandmother had to go through so much pain to provide for me. But now, people are prepared to throw away their meat and flesh, desperate to pay me lavishly to cut it out of them and take it away. I pat down my tie, and walk into my office. The next Stacy, or Tracy, or Laura, sits in the leather chair, waiting patiently. Her perfect frame outlined with flowing blonde hair. Long eyelashes plastered black, firm lips painted pink. I gaze upon her sun-kissed skin. I can already taste it. Good afternoon, Ms. Roberts, I say, extending my hand. My name's Dr. William Jones. It's very nice to meet you. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/SubstantialByte 788. An immortal cannibal is stalking me. What is the difference between a cannibal and a zombie? Free will, the ability to choose whether or not to eat another human being. Being aware of other choices, comparing and contrasting the attributes of each option. Do I eat a steak, or maybe a man's liver, or do I go healthy and have an apple? A zombie eats out of instinct, the animalistic drive to exterminate its hunger. It doesn't make a conscious decision about the prey it hunts and devours. It just does it, moving like a biomechanical machine, programmed by an algorithm not of its own creation. A cannibal, on the other hand, relishes the experience of dining on human flesh. For the zombie, it's a necessity, for the cannibal, it's a delicacy. Yet, if one is manipulated to have only one choice and that choice is to feast on your fellow, good and kindly neighbors, a narrowing down of options accorded to powerlessness, even with the capacity to know of more ethical alternatives, does that make one a zombie or a cannibal? I am not a very attractive man. I learned early on as a teenager that I was destined to live a lonely life. Well into my 30s I was still struggling with severe acne, coupled with an early onset of rapid hair loss. My teeth, well, why even try? My stature, barely over 5 feet. The good Lord humbles as he pleases, but I think he poured it on thick with me. Arrogance and pride are not vices I struggle with. That's why I was surprised when an attractive young woman took an interest in me. She had long straight black hair, and deep green eyes. Her skin was of a fair complexion but contrasted well with her dark hair. She wore scarlet lipstick that reminded me of wine poured into golden chalices, the wine, as an altar boy, I would watch the priest turn into blood. She was like a color-saturated photo, with exaggerated hues of dark and bright. She looked both inviting and ominous. I worked at a delicatessen, preparing food, slicing meat and cheeses, cleaning and closing, not at all exciting or adventurous, but I enjoyed the stability of my well-known and expected routine. That routine was shattered when I first met Hazel. She came into the diner with a minute left until closing. I hate last-minute customers, and they always seem to be the pickiest, most dull-brained morons to walk through the door. There's no such thing as a last-minute customer who is quick and decisive. I had told Larry, my coworker, that he could leave early that night. He was eager to get to his buddy's house and watch the game. I didn't mind closing by myself. In fact, sometimes I felt like I got done quicker working alone. I was making good time, almost done, when she walked in. "Ma'am, we're about to close," I said without hiding my irritation. "I'll help you clean and then you can take me home. I need a ride." I was astonished by her brashness. "A what?" "A ride. I need a ride home." "I'll work for it." She started picking up dishes from the tables and moving them to the bar. "Ma'am." "Hazel." "Call me Hazel." "What's your name?" "Ben." "I can't let you do that. I'll get all this done myself. I'll give you a ride home, but first let me finish." She walked over to me and held out her hand. "Can I have the car keys, Ben?" A few thoughts went through my head, the first being that she was going to steal my car. The second was about how beautiful she was and how I didn't want to miss a chance to be around her. Foolishly, I handed her the keys. I cleaned up and closed out the register as fast as I could. I could hear the car idling outside and my stereo blasting at full volume. I walked outside and locked the front door. When I turned to walk towards the car, I saw that she was motioning me to come quickly, with a hasty waving gesture. I love this song. Come on, Ben. Dance with me. I got in the car and started driving. She was dancing in her seat, eyes closed, and oblivious to the passing cityscape. Where to? Where do you live? I could barely hear myself over the music. She didn't respond, so I raised my voice. Where do you live? Still no response. I was getting irritated, so I yelled at the top of my voice, where in the hell do you live? She flipped off the radio. Don't ever yell at me, Ben. Never yell at me. If we're going to be together, you can't yell at me. What? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find out where you live so I can take you home. I'm tired. It's been a long day. St. Basil's. The old crazy house. It's no longer in operation. It was a sanatorium for emotional ills, and yes, I live there. That's the only place I can live at this moment. I knew exactly where St. Basil's was. It looked like a castle with turrets, towers, and arches throughout. The sidewalk had a Roman colonnade encompassing the entire length up to the large wooden entry doors. The architecture lacked consistency. It was an asymmetrical collage of numerous historical styles. It was beautiful, but unsettling. In October, a part of the sanatorium was used for a haunted house attraction. I pulled up to the fence that surrounded the abandoned property. Well, it was nice meeting you. I hope you find a home soon. If you need any help, you know where I work. Come on inside, Ben. But that's trespassing. I don't want any trouble. She reached over, grabbed the steering wheel with one hand and with the other put the car in park. Then she turned the ignition off and quickly jumped out of the car with my keys. There was an obnoxious dinging as the car was indicating that its lights were still on. She ran parallel with the fence for about 10 yards and then ducked through an opening. I watched her dart across the lawn and hop through a shattered window. Come get me, Ben, a faint voice echoed. I sat there stunned. This lady was crazy, and I didn't have any desire to go in there, but she had my keys. I turned the lights off, not because I wanted to, but to put an end to that torturous, incessant dinging, that metronome of irritation. The property was dark, but I could see the outline of the building, especially the towers reaching up into the moonlit sky. They seemed taller in the dark and separate from the main building, expanding outward across the property, like a children's pop-up book. The colonnade resembled a standing row of giants ready to attack. In the dark, the building was alive, perceptions, illusions, and reality striated together in a unity of madness. There was movement everywhere, but nothing moving. I took out my cell phone and activated the light. I walked through the opening in the fence and made my way to the broken window. It was once a large, insulated window, but now all that was left was the loose-fitting wooden frame, with intermittent shards of triangular glass. I imagined myself walking through the jaws of a large prehistoric shark. The floor was a checkerboard green and white linoleum. As I walked, the floor creaked and I bounced with each step, convinced that at any moment the entire floor was going to fall through to the basement. There was an empty wheelchair in the hallway. I thought I saw it move, but then again, I've never owned or had a rocking chair, for the fear of seeing it rock back and forth with no one in it. Just to ease my mind, I laid the wheelchair on its side. If it was going to move on its own, it was going to be with some effort. "Benny." I heard her voice coming from the end of the hall, and I could see a flicker of light coming through the passageway. I walked past several rooms on each side, each constructed exactly the same, a bed or at least a bed frame, a sink, and a small unreachable window near the top of the wall. I reached the last room on the right. There were lit candles strewn about the room, mostly on the floor, but two were situated on the sink. Hazel's clothes were tossed near the opposite wall. She was lying on the bed nude, on her back, propped up on her elbows. On her stomach were my keys. "Come get your keys, Benny." She was perfect. An angel in hell, trapped in a filthy, lonely abode. The light flashed across her body, exposing a beauty I had never experienced in my life. I wasn't a virgin, but I had never been with a woman as gorgeous as her. I got undressed and climbed on top of her. We began to have sex. She moaned with pleasure, but then she started to repeat a startling phrase, something not even remotely akin to sex: "I'm so hungry. I'm so very hungry." Over and over again she complained about her hunger. Moan and complain. Moan and complain. It was putting me off. I felt guilty. Did she want love, or did she need food? I was making love to a malnourished, homeless woman. How low have I sunk? I stopped and started to get off the bed. "No. Don't stop, Benny. Please don't stop." I resumed and tried my best to ignore what she was saying. She grabbed my left hand and stuck my index finger in her mouth. She started sucking on my finger. It was weird, but better than hearing her complain about an empty stomach. And then she bit down. I heard and felt the bone above my knuckle crack. She cinched down harder as I tried to pull away. The blood began to spill on her breasts. She shook her head and tore away my finger. Blood shot through the air and landed on a candle, extinguishing the flame. Hazel started eating my severed finger, tearing the flesh from the bone. She was a ravenous wolf, devouring her kill quick and efficiently, as if to guard her food. The faster she ate, the quicker she would rid herself of the prospect of another dog stealing her quarry. Her demeanor had changed. She no longer looked young and beautiful. She looked like an elderly lady with a mean disposition. Her hair was now white and thin. The skin on her body hung loose and wrinkled. I grabbed my clothes, and luckily, the keys were right there. I ran out of the room, not even taking the time to get dressed. I got to the window when I heard her beckoning me to come back. "Benny, come back. I only needed a little bit. Just a little. I don't want to hurt you anymore. I want to make you immortal. I want you to be with me forever." I could hear her voice getting louder as she tried to run after me. My heart was beating fast, and I could taste the bile in my throat. I jumped in my car without any clothes. The sensation of vinyl felt different when you had no clothes on. I started the car and began to back up. I caught a glimpse of her standing in the frame of the window. She was young and beautiful again. It was a charade, but it was irresistible. I found myself at a dead stop, staring at the voluptuous figure who had just eaten my finger. I forced myself to snap out of it and get the hell out of there. I was bleeding all over myself, so I took my shirt and wrapped it around my finger. I found a convenient place to stop and put on my pants and shoes. How was I going to explain this to the people at the emergency room? Fortunately, they didn't ask too many questions. I guess they've seen it all. A homeless woman biting off a man's finger is low on the list of exotic occurrences for a nurse in the ER. The next few weeks were somewhat uneventful. She did hang around outside the delicatessen, but I ignored her the best I could. There were notes left on my windshield, explaining how she loved me and that if I would talk to her, she would explain everything. I wanted to call the police and report her, but I was embarrassed. I had slept with a desperate woman. Additionally, in her notes she had threatened that if I went to the police, she would claim that I had attacked her and she fought back in self-defense. Who would they believe? I honestly didn't know. The notes became less frequent and then they stopped altogether. I was relieved that the situation had resolved itself. Maybe she grew tired of me, a boring lad with nothing to offer. Maybe she found some other poor sap to bother. Whatever happened didn't matter to me as long as she was out of my life. And then, she reappeared. I had let Larry go home early yet again. She snuck in and hid in the supply closet. I had locked the door after the last customer and when I turned around, there she was with a pistol in her hand. Hazel, be cool. Sit down, Benny, and put your hands behind the chair. I did as she commanded. She came over and handcuffed me to the chair. Benny, I am over 500 years old. I know you don't believe that. You're too conventional. You live in a routine world and never notice the horror and beauty on the perimeter of reality. I am a cannibal from a long line of cannibals. We are immortal. Our food, human flesh. The dark god offered himself as sustenance to the first cannibal, the first servant of our Lord. To feed on him is to feed on immortality. To eat his flesh is to live forever. To feed on a divine cannibal is to attain eternal life. We are the tree of life. I fed on one, and now I offer you the same gift. I'm not interested. Oh, Benny. It's not that bad. It's not even an acquired taste. It's delicious and you get to live forever. Eat of me, and be immortal. I'm hungry, but I don't abuse it. More than anything though, I'm lonely. Hazel walked over behind the bar and grabbed a steak knife. She put the gun down and placed her hand on the table with her fingers splayed out wide. She started sawing off her index finger. She showed no emotions. There were no indications that she was in pain. The bone is always difficult. She turned her hand palm up and began sawing from that direction. There was blood everywhere, dripping and draining onto the floor. Even though she had cut deep on both sides, the bone was impenetrable. Frustrated, she grabbed the shredded digit with her other hand and began moving the finger back and forth until finally the bone snapped. The finger hung by a single thread of flesh. She bit through it like it was piece of thread and placed the finger neatly in front of me. Her hand was bleeding profusely, but in a short time another finger would regenerate. She walked around and uncuffed me from the chair. Eat and become immortal. Be with me forever. Only a bite and a swallow will do. You don't have to consume the entire finger, but my feelings will be hurt if you don't." She laughed. She stood in front of the table, no longer bleeding, sporting a splendid half-grown finger. She stared silently, waiting for a response. "Take it home with you. Think about it. You don't have to decide now. What if I choose not to? I'll know Benny. I'll feel it. Consume and will be intertwined. 1. But, if you don't, then there will be consequences." "What do you mean?" She gave a slight smile and gave me a stern look. "Eat or be eaten." She walked toward the door, and at the last moment she turned and spoke. "Oh, by the way, Larry resigned. He'll need to be replaced." She walked out the door. I took the finger, the forbidden fruit, home and placed it on my kitchen table. I stare at it, thinking through my choices and the consequences of not doing as Hazel requested. It is a forced decision, a manipulation of my will, but I see no other option than to do as she commands. I will never identify as a cannibal. I am becoming and always will be an unwilling zombie, devoid of any power to assert my own will. I did not choose through my own volition what I am now about to do. It's eat or be eaten. 5th story. The FBI is using cannibals to hunt other cannibals. They are currently investigating my neighbor. I don't know what the fuck just happened. There's blood everywhere, and I just survived with my life. You're probably thinking, why not call the cops? Well, they wouldn't believe me. It all started a few weeks ago when a solemn-looking man knocked on my front door. I live alone, so I guess I was grateful for the company and didn't expect an FBI agent standing impatiently on the other side. "Agent McGregor," the tall man said, extending a hand and offering a curt smile. "I think we need to have a little chat." McGregor must have seen the look on my face, because once he came inside and sat down on my split pea green colored couch, his smile became more sympathetic and he leaned forward, clasping both hands together. "Look, before you start sweating bullets, it's not you we're investigating. Your neighbor is our current target. But we aren't completely sure. The man we're tracking seems to have changed aliases several times. All the information, though, seems to point to your neighbor." McGregor paused again, steepling his fingers, giving me a subtle but discernible look. "This is where you come in, I'm afraid. We'd like to set up shop here, if you don't mind. We want to monitor this man and make sure that he is the one we're really after." I hesitated at first, and my hesitation only grew once he told me more about their method for detecting criminals. Apparently, the FBI will go to extreme lengths to make sure that who they are targeting is the correct individual. Regrettably, the FBI has made mistakes in the past, and don't worry, the cannibal we're going to bring in has been completely domesticated. It won't harm you. At least, according to my experience with it, everything should be completely safe. Obviously, I freaked the fuck out at the suggestion, and demanded to see McGregor's badge. He rolled his eyes and pulled it out. "This isn't the FBI from the 70s. We've had to adapt to a harsher environment, which means using any method available to catch the correct perpetrator, even if that method is similar to the criminal being pursued." He kept assuring me I'd be safe, and actually I'd be safer with a trained bloodhound prowling the grounds. I certainly didn't feel that way when McGregor and another agent, one Ms. Cook, transported this creature, technically human, from their large white van to my house in a cold-looking gray cage. The cage seemed to rattle at random points, making the two agents buckle and causing one of them to press a button on a remote, presumably activating the shock collar since it yelped in pain. The brief, involuntary pity I felt for the creature seemed to waylay my fear a bit, but mostly the fact that they seemed to carry a shock collar and weren't afraid to use it. Everything seemed fine at first, well, fine enough, given the incredibly bizarre circumstances. McGregor formally introduced me to Ms. Cook, a paper-thin but reasonably friendly woman who seemed to have a way with the cannibal still in the cage. "His name is Percy," she said, giving me a glance and returning her attention to the cannibal. Despite Ms. Cook's apparent friendliness toward the creature, I wouldn't get too close. "She has been its exclusive trainer for the past year," McGregor said, placing his body between the cage and myself. "Hey, it's not like I haven't died a couple of times in the process of trying to get it to trust me," Ms. Cook replied, looking a bit irritated. When Ms. Cook slowly opened the cage, Percy crawled out of the opening. I was shocked at its appearance. Its skin seemed a scaled mixture of red, orange and yellow, and its teeth were twisted fangs. I backed away quickly, hiding behind the kitchen table. McGregor and Cook readied their weapons in case the beast decided to attack. It didn't. Instead, it placidly lay on the floor like a dog, eyes glassy, brain apparently half dead. It took me a while to trust its presence, but even after the end of the first day, I couldn't fully turn my back on the thing without an intense shiver. It prowled the house until sunset, making disconcerting growling noises and standing on all fours, peering above the sink out the kitchen window. To my neighbor's house. McGregor was on his phone for most of the day, letting Ms. Cook do all the work. When I asked McGregor what he was up to at one point, more out of anxiety than anything since I felt uncomfortable with only one agent doing all the work, he just said he was texting his wife. "I'd feel a bit more comfortable if you'd help Ms. Cook watch this thing. I mean, it keeps growling all the time, looking at me." "Just instinct is all," McGregor replied, giving me an absent smile. "It won't attack unless provoked. And besides, Ms. Cook is an excellent agent, quite vigilant. I've put my life into her hands more than once." There didn't seem to be any way to get McGregor to look up from his phone, so I just gave up. I remained close to Ms. Cook. Every time she turned around, she practically bumped into me. She glared at me while trying to keep Percy in line. Eventually, Percy crept into the backyard, sticking to the shadows until Ms. Cook gave it the signal that it could investigate further. It began to sniff everywhere, starting with the oak tree where I used to play as a kid. Percy lingered there and lifted his leg to urinate, then it continued to explore the yard. Our neighbor wasn't home, and the other neighbor, the one not being investigated, was always gone on business trips, so we didn't have to worry about him. If they had been home, would not have been able to bring Percy out to pick up the scent of the other cannibal. Percy kept going in circles. It always returned to my equipment shed, sniffing curiously and growling. We opened it up. I didn't see anything there at first except what I had been already expecting. Then a strange, red pentagram began to glow in the center of the shed. I thought I was seeing things at first. But it disappeared and reappeared several times before ceasing entirely. I was absolutely positive I wasn't seeing things. "That's rather odd," Ms. Cook said, making a note in her little pad. She insisted we wait around for a while to see if the circle reappeared. It didn't. Well, we're going to label this a site of interest, Ms. Cook explained. She gave me a slight, cold smile. For some weird reason, it made me a bit more comfortable. She had been primarily focused on following Percy around, which I was grateful for, but didn't offer much in the way of having a decent bedside manner. I mean, here I was, FBI agents combing my home, more importantly a fucking mutated cannibal prowling around, and neither one of them would give me the time of day. After Percy finished his investigations of my backyard, we went back into the house to take a break. I needed a drink of water. So I put a clean glass underneath the faucet, and was about to turn it on. As soon as the water came out, Percy barked, which scared the shit out of me. The glass fell in the sink and shattered. Ms. Cook sighed. Didn't I say for you to ask permission before you do anything? Percy just came off a very difficult assignment. The slightest thing could set him off. Everything all right in here? Ms. Cook, do we have a problem? It was McGregor, looking impatiently at the both of us. Well, after that incident, it was dull in the house. As dull as it can get with a cannibal at your side. After asking permission, I was able to make a sandwich and pour a glass of lemonade. Naturally, I was a bit confused as to why lemonade didn't bother Percy, but pure water did. Ms. Cook only responded with, "That's classified information." She gave me a steely glare, then said, "And don't forget it, because I can't guarantee what he'll do if it happens again." Once Ms. Cook left, I sat at the kitchen table to eat. I noticed the distinct lack of enthusiasm Percy had for my sandwich. It was like a dog in every sense except this one. As I wolfed down the sandwich, I couldn't take my eyes off it as it stared at from the next room. All of a sudden, I felt a pang of fear as it continued to stare, thinking about how it wanted to devour me because I was human. I overheard Ms. Cook telling McGregor about the weird pentagram shape that had shown itself in the equipment shed. McGregor muttered something back, something I couldn't quite hear. I heard the last part, though. Keep an eye on it, and on Percy. You remember what happened last time, right? I went to bed around 10, while McGregor and Ms. Cook remained downstairs. They said they'd turn in about midnight, or shortly after. I figured as long as Percy and I weren't on the same floor without one of the agents, I'd be okay. Surprisingly, I fell asleep fairly quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night. I heard scratching sounds coming from downstairs. I remained in bed for over 10 minutes until I heard scratching that was much louder than before. The sound woke me with a pop, and I jolted out of bed. Everything was quiet for a moment. The scratching resumed. I hurried downstairs, too groggy to worry about my safety. I halted at the next to last step. What I saw frightened the shit out of me. Percy was crouched, clawing a shape on the floor. Despite the horror of it, I swallowed a scream. I was too scared to scream. Seeing Percy in the soft glow of the dim light, I insisted remain on in the kitchen. Without either McGregor or Ms. Cook, I felt completely terrified. I tried to back up the stairs as quietly as I could when I thought it was safe enough to do so. Luckily, I made it upstairs without stepping on one of the boards that creaked. Lingering at the top of the stairs, for a moment, I tried to listen for any sounds. Nothing. I then tiptoed as quickly as I could to my room and locked the door. I leaned against it panting. My heart pounded. I expected Percy to crawl up the stairs after me, but several minutes passed. I waited for over an hour in sheer terror, but nothing happened. Eventually, my breathing slowed. I remained as vigilant for as long as I could. I must have fallen asleep at some point. Not sure if it was the adrenaline wearing off. All I know is that I woke up the next morning to a sharp rapping at the door. Once I let Ms. Cook in, she asked why I had the door blocked. Hesitating for a moment, I told her about what I had seen Percy doing. Well, I believe you that something scratched a shape into the floor. But I just can't believe Percy would scratch a pentagram. I was shocked that the shape on the kitchen floor turned out to be the same thing that we had found in my equipment shed. But something didn't make sense. I wondered why we saw the glowing red pentagram in the garage. If Percy was connected somehow, I failed to understand the meaning. Had he been the reason it appeared? Ms. Cook seemed just as confused as I was, and still refused to acknowledge that Percy could have possibly done it. Later that morning, something else happened. I had just come upstairs from the basement and had made my way silently to the kitchen. Percy and Ms. Cook were in the living room. They didn't see me yet because I hadn't made it to the archway that separated the two rooms. I heard them talking in hushed voices. "We are getting close," I heard someone say. It wasn't McGregor because, well, for one thing it didn't sound like him at all, and more importantly he had gone to the grocery store. "I think so," Ms. Cook replied. "It appears that what we have found so far corroborates our initial theory. Just make sure you understand," the guttural voice said, "that you work for me. Not McGregor. Your loyalties to the FBI come second." "Yes, Percival," I heard Ms. Cook say. After they had been silent for a few seconds, I made my way back to the foot of the basement stairs, then hurried down them with as much stealth as I was capable of. I didn't want them to think I heard their conversation. I'm typing this in my room with the door blocked. I don't really care if Ms. Cook asks me why I did it again. I don't want to take a chance that she'll see me write this. I just find this all strange and terrifying, especially since neither McGregor or Ms. Cook has stepped an inch onto my neighbor's property. Was their initial reason a ruse? Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.